Hey everyone, Gingerbeard Mark here, your favourite Wolverhampton-based ginger-bearded podcast and Q&A host. Last month I was really privileged to be invited by Wolverhampton Literature Festival to host several Q&As at Wolverhampton Art Gallery. The first one being this one with Richard Herring. We talk all about his new book, Can I Have My Ball Back? Which, even though it's about testicular cancer, is so funny, and Richard always sees the sort of bright side of the situation, or definitely finds the gag in whatever dark moment he's in. So the book is well worth picking up, and I think we had a really fun chat about it. So without further ado, live from Wolverhampton Art Gallery at Wolverhampton Literature Festival 2023, Richard Herring.
This is probably the poshest venue you've played in Wolverhampton for a while.
Yeah, I didn't know Wolverhampton even had a photograph in it, let alone an art gallery. Amazing. It's beautiful.
Hello, everyone. I forgot your audience do call and response. Welcome to Richard Herring's Wolverhampton Literature Festival, or Arhawalutha.
Yeah.
Thank you. I stole that joke from Jonathan Rhodes on Twitter, if he's here. Introduce myself. I'm Gingerbeard Mark. I host a podcast. And
Your parents had foresight, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, exactly. They knew. Well, we know what we're going to call him. But I'm here to talk to comedian, author, stone clearer, self-playing snookerist, and host of Rahulastapa,
better.
Richard Keith Herring.
Yeah, thank you. Hello. Hello.
We're here to talk about Richard's new book, Can I Have My Ball Back? Which, spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't read it, is about you getting cancer.
Yeah, of the testicle.
Of the testicle, you know, and having it removed.
Yes. Well, no need to buy the book now.
But how are you now? How are you doing now?
Yeah, good, I think. Yeah, it's it was all like 2 years ago now, so it was happening. It was actually, yeah, I went to the doctors on the 24th of January, and I was in the operating theatre on the 24th of February, I think. So coming up to the 2-year anniversary of being a uniballer. Very exciting for me. And, you know, I'm pretty glad, because probably at this stage, I was sort of 2 years ago, I was thinking, oh, maybe I've got like 3 months to live or something. Yeah. So I'm quite glad to be here in 2 years' time, and all healthy, and the other one's, you know, doubled its output. So it's all fine.
You've embraced being a monoballer, though. You talk about it in the book, where you were given the option of having a prosthetic.
Yeah.
And
it's, you know, I thought let's be who we are. I mean, I think I can understand why certain people would want to have a prosthetic put in, but it's especially testicular cancer is something that affects a lot of younger men. So I was 53 or whatever at the time, and that was quite old. That's beyond though it does. My oncologist keeps telling me I have to point out that older men do get it, so do keep checking yourself, everyone. So they offered. That was they asked me, do I want to store sperm because I might be infertile if I had chemotherapy, and they want. Do I want a prosthetic testicle? And I just immediately thought no, because, you know, A, be what you are, but you know, I'd sort of thought, even if my wife hadn't known what was going on, and she did know what was going on. If she hadn't known what was going on, I don't think she would have noticed. Yeah, it was gone. And not to say, because she's not down there. She's down there a lot, but you're not necessarily counting them. If you find one, you think that's a result, and you don't start looking for the other one, right? That's my experience with balls. So, you know, I didn't. Who would it be for? Was my question. And it's only for yourself if you want to feel like, oh, I'm worried if someone sees me, and I don't. Well, who's going to see my balls? And it's only my wife, any medical people who want to have a look, and very strange men at the gym are going to, you know. So it's, if anyone's looking at my balls, first of all, hello. There's something more interesting to look at here. If you want to have a look, but also that's not the done thing, is it, in the changing rooms? So it feels very much like you're doing it for yourself, and I didn't feel I needed to fool myself into thinking I had a second testicle when I knew that I didn't. Charlie Borman, who I talked to, I'm doing a podcast version of this book, which is starting to come out soon. So I interviewed Charlie Borman, who I look like, who loves motorcycling like I do, and no real big fans in then, that's fine, and who I've often been mistaken for, and he has also had testicular cancer and had a testicle removed, but he did have the prosthetic, because we are the good and evil version of men with this face. And he said that because it's sewn into your scrotum, that if you sit on it on your motorbike, that can be quite painful. But he still elected to keep it in. That's all I'm saying. So you can have it taken out, and you can change your mind. Yeah. I mean, someone's out there making bollocks for people with one.
That's someone's job. Yeah,
they make them different sizes. It's wonderful. But if you've got one, well done to you. That wasn't my choice.
Yeah, you're not judging anyone.
No.
And throughout the book, obviously, you use loads of different synonyms for your testicles, your plums, Do you have a particular favourite that you use? And you obviously you have a young son, and I wondered if there's a term that you use for him, like when you're talking to him.
And I mean, my daughter constantly jokes about me having one ball. She like has worked out I've got one ball, and any time the word ball comes up, she'll make a reference and joke. She's 8 years old. And joking about balls, so well done. So the gene has passed on to the next generation. I think we just call them balls, but it's yeah. I mean, it's kind of fun. It's not. When I did a book 20 years ago called Talking Cock, and there was a lot more euphemisms for penis than there are for testicles. I like the slightly less wrinkly version of the Chuckle Brothers. And like the Chuckle Brothers, one of mine's gone now, and arguably the best one, I would say. So, see, it seems apt.
That's such a great line. As with lots of your books, like your last book, The Problem with Men, you're kind of educational with it. So this isn't just about a Twitter thing that you do every year when you tell people when International Men's Day is. You talk a lot about different sort of, misogyny and then you've gone on and done the same thing with this. This isn't just a memoir about you going through what you've gone through. You end each chapter with like an on the ball section, as you call it, which is a random fact about testicles.
Yeah, sometimes random, sometimes connected to whatever's going on in the story. But yeah, I guess that's partly, weirdly, I've sort of been forced into the companion piece of Talking Cock, which I wasn't planning to do. I mean, it's got to be the anus next. That's the only one. That's all I've got left.
You've got 20 years to wait.
I'll wait until my bum goes, and then I'll write. I mean, there was nothing wrong with my cock when I did Talking Cock. Just putting that out, it's fine. But I think, I've always liked that within my stand-up to make the shows. I've taken subjects often like religion and death and love. And so as well as trying to be funny about them, you're trying to think about the philosophy of them and why. And usually it's subjects we don't talk about very openly, and the reason these things are problematic is because people don't talk about them. So I think as a comedian and as a person, I found it very helpful to, discuss these personal things, but also as a comedian, anything embarrassing you do is material. Yeah. And most of my comedy is aimed at myself rather than anyone else. So, but often I think, dare I tell an audience of people about this embarrassing situation? But the ones you worry about most are the ones that seem to go down the best, because I think people think, oh God, thank God it isn't. Yeah. It isn't just me. In fact, like within Talking Cock, which I toured, for a good few years, I was in Brighton, I think, and a guy came back into the theatre. He was quite a big, burly biker guy with a leather jacket. Said, I think I left my fags behind. And then he said, I just wanted to say that thing with snapping the banjo string. I thought I was the only one that had ever happened to. Thanks, mate. And then left without his cigarette. So, I think it's nice to, it's nice to reassure people. And I think it's good to have a bit more meat on the bone, as I lose a bit more meat off my bone. To the book than just here's the story, because I thought the minute this happened, I thought, well, as a stand-up comedian, as you're going through it, you're thinking this is pretty good for my job. Yeah. As long as even if I do die, I can still do one fantastic last show and get a hologram to perform it. So as a comedian, your reaction is slightly different to everyone else's. I wasn't delighted all the way through, but it was like, I think there's something in this. But having done, it feels so weird because so many of my old ideas feed into this idea. I've done so much about masculinity. I've done so much about genitals. I did a show where I grew a Hitler moustache, and now I've taken on Hitler balls, or Hitler ball. Nearly everything I've done seems to. There were so many. Snookers, balls, stones. I was always joking about replacing my body with stones, and a stone is another euphemism for testicle, because anything round is a euphemism for testicle. So, it just felt weird that it all came together like this. But again, I think if you had to choose someone who was the best person to get testicular cancer, you said I've got to give one person it. I'm the best person to get it because I'll make jokes about it. It's cancer isn't amusing, but cancer of the testicles is close to being amusing. It's as close as cancer. It's the funniest place to get cancer. And look, as it turns out, it's also almost the safest place to get cancer. It's a very curable and treatable cancer, which I didn't know until they'd removed the testicle. So, I think anything that reassures people, 99% of men who get testicular cancer really are going to be probably fine. It's sort of 95 to 99% survival rate, which is incredible. Because as long as you catch it soon enough. So, there's an element where I can educate people. Me and my wife discussed whether I was going to kind of go public and say it was happening. It would have been really hard not to, because it was during lockdown and I was doing so much content from home. And there'd been, I'd alluded to it without really saying too much about it. But if I'd suddenly gone, I'm not going to be around for a couple of weeks, and, it would have felt weird. But equally, we were sort of worried. I mean, my wife was more worried that Tshirt or the comedy website would make it their headline, and then everyone would know, and there was no taking it back. As it happens, Tshirt they did review the book in the end, but they never mentioned it when it came out, so it didn't matter. But what was interesting, the minute I did talk about it, which was basically the day of the operation, I got so many tweets from other people, like some people I knew that had been through the same thing, who hadn't ever mentioned it, but a lot of strangers, and people going, hey, this happened to me 30 years ago, you're going to be fine. As much as these things, you go, well, I might not be fine, but it was very reassuring to get this stuff. And equally, people were tweeting me going, oh, actually, having heard about what you're doing, I've been to the doctor and same thing's happening to me, or same thing hasn't happened to me, but thank God I went to get checked. So, it's so great to be able to talk about it. There's, to know that already there's 2 or 3 people out there at least who might not have gone to the doctors and might have been in trouble, who, because of me being open about it, is so whatever else happened with all of this stuff, that would be quite a nice comeback. So I think talking about this stuff is, men aren't very happy to talk about it. I think men would feel, and I felt a bit, I was worried about whether it would affect sexual performance and whether you'd lose both of them and whether what would happen there. I wasn't particularly worried about it emasculating me, but I think it's interesting to look at why balls are so associated with masculinity and strength when they're the most pathetic and weak, vulnerable thing. I mean, that's the reason, because masculinity is this very fragile front, really, that men put on, or most of us put on, I think, in order to appear something that we're not necessarily. And there is a weakness to us, and there is, we do. I just think the more we can talk about this sort of stuff, the better. The more open men can be, and it's great to see in the 20 years since Talking Cock, I think how much men are opening up and talking about issues and talking about depression and all these subjects and being honest about who they are, because at the end of the day, I don't think being a man and a woman is particularly it's not like all of the women fit into this category and all the men fit into this category, as we're increasingly learning. And so I never saw myself. I feel I'm a man, and losing a testicle hasn't made me feel I'm not a man. But if I compared myself to other guys, I go, well, I'm a man, but not like that guy. so we're all individuals, and I think it's interesting about, especially in the current, you can sort of take this one either way, whichever side of this controversial divide you're on, but losing a testicle hasn't affected how I view myself. So my idea of my gender is not necessarily located in your genitals. I feel like if I lost my penis and my other ball, I would still feel I was a man, even though I didn't. So there's something more to us than our outward body.
Than a dangling.
And sometimes what's inside isn't the same as what's outside. So,
Absolutely. And you talked about being honest about it and sort of subtly honest about it. And I remember watching the episode of Twitch of Fun, which you sort of find out in the book is like you'd been to the hospital that day and then you were doing Twitch of Fun that night. And I was just like watching it, I was like, something feels off.
Yeah.
And then the donkey song plays, which if anyone doesn't watch Twitch of Fun...
I'm sure they all do. Gets about 200 viewers a week, so I'm sure they're all in here.
But there's a song, like you do birthday shout-outs, like a sort of children's TV show.
It's basically, I started doing a ventriloquism show in lockdown initially with my great-grandfather's ventriloquist puppet. And then I sort of started creating all these other characters sort of came. It was very improvised. So the birthday donkey is the donkey I had when I was 5 years old. I remember this toy. And it was actually one of the first laughs I ever got was doing a little show behind the sofa with the donkey and maybe a cat. I had this selection of finger puppets. And I remember my mum and my grandma really laughing and loving the sound. And now, in hindsight, I realise they were laughing at how pathetic and childish I was. I mean, how cute I was. But I remember getting the laugh, and I remember the feeling of this is amazing. Yeah. That donkey I've managed to find. I pulled off his ears when I was a kid, and so he's become this kind of tortured. In the West Country where I grew up, there was a thing called Gus Honeybun, which you may have seen on holidays, where there was a birth that kids would write in for their birthdays, and this rabbit would do winks or jumps or stuff. So in Twitch of Fun, I've got this reluctant birthday donkey who wants to die because I've tortured him so much and he's in pain, who I make do birthdays for grown-ups who are 55 years old, and he has to do 55 jumps while he's going, why, let me die. But in that song's about, happy you've lived another year and you haven't even died, though cancer may be secretly lurking deep inside, which I wrote before, but there's something I did November, the November before I was diagnosed with testicular cancer, having no idea I had testicular cancer, so again, all these little things. But that episode, I went in for my scan and thinking that episode that the puppet sort of started asking, because I'm not really quite in control of the puppet. No. And the puppet sort of asked what would happen to them if I died and that sort of thing, but it was always quite a bleak idea anyway. So it was the idea of it is an ex-TV star who's now broadcasting from his attic. It's a very clever parody. And thinking this is going to get him back on TV, even though what he's doing is incredibly inappropriate and weird and made up and terrible and great.
And the puppets ruin it for they're always trying to sort of ruin the show for you. Think they can do it better.
But it's it's one of my favourite things that came out of lockdown. Just that it was the having the ball. Now it was the balls to begin with to just go and try something like that without a script and without even knowing what I was going to do, and then all of those characters sort of emerging really from the show rather than vice versa. I'm bringing it back again soon. I've had a bit of a break from it, but I think there's something very exciting in that. And of course, eventually, I was then presented with the opportunity of thinking out, is a way to cope with losing a testicle to make a puppet of the testicle and try and discuss with the testicle why it tried to kill me. So it's called Right Bollock. This is a facsimile and not it's not the real one's about that big. So which is about how big it felt when it was out. So I've got this. It's called Right Bollock, and it's just it's sort of again about that anyone in your life who it's that sort of Moby Dick thing of taking revenge, even though it ultimately what the revenge of the testicle feeling it's been. Not as looked after as the penis in my life, deciding to take revenge on me by killing me. But cancer, as a few comedians have had cancer said, cancer also kills itself if it kills you. So it's this sort of, so determined to have revenge that you don't care about what happens to you. So I thought it would be an interesting way to try and process it, and whether it was a good way or not to process it, which was also part of the idea of it. But it's I've now got like a Rod Hull style jacket with a very bad false hand, and the hand keeps falling off, which is actually just accidental, but it's on it. And then a hole in the jacket, and the testicle pops through there, and it's just trying to ruin my life, and for whatever reason. So it was a big. Again, I thought about this and thought, Richard Eisen, who's this terrific guy in York, who just started making puppets for me and sending them to me once I started doing this show. He did one of the Duke of York for some reason, and he did one of me, and he did. And I commissioned a few things from him, and I commissioned this testicle. And it was quite a weird email to write. I'm thinking about, to be prepared to make a puppet of my excised cancerous testicle. He went for it and gave me 8 or 9 different versions on a piece of which I've got up in my room.
I've got a quote from Richard Ison.
Okay.
I got in touch with him and asked him about it, because obviously he gets brought up a lot, but I was like, does he want to have his say? And so he just said, if anyone is going to ask you to make a homicidal amputated right testicle, it's going to be Richard Herring. Can't wait for his next illness to see what he has cut out of his body and asks me to make a puppet of. I felt really privileged that he'd used my work on Twitch of Fun, and to be mentioned in the book really blew me away. But then he's asked a question. I didn't ask him to ask a question. I thought it was a bit rude.
I'll ask the questions.
What would you draw the line at for comedy? And can I make the puppet?
Well, it's, some people would say they wouldn't joke about cancer. That was the kind of thing in the 70s, wasn't it? The guys would go, yeah, I'll joke about anything. I'll joke about black fellas, never disable kids or cancer. So I think the thing is, you can joke about, and there's jokes in everything, and humour was very important for me to get through this whole thing. So it did seem the right decision. There's a few instances in this story that aren't humorous, and certainly when I realised it probably was going to be cancer, I wasn't at that exact moment thinking, hooray, I can do a puppet in a show, it's going to be great. I was very unhappy at the prospect of, I've got very young kids, and it was sort of heart-stoppingly terrifying to think I might suddenly die. But I've always treated everything with humour, and it would be hypocritical and weird if you suddenly went, oh, no, we're going to take this. Yeah. Now something's happened to me, we're going to take... And that's sort of the worst. You see that in audiences sometimes. Someone's really laughing along for the whole show, and then 75 minutes in, they go, oh, no, don't make a joke about... I'm just going to say it because you're there being bald. Because... And now he's got to walk out. Quite a lot of you are, actually. Or whatever it is. You've made a joke about the thing that upsets me, even though they've been laughing at everything else. And I think that's kind of crazy. If in comedy, you've kind of... I mean, if it's a terrible joke and it's crossed the line, maybe, but... Sorry. But I did cross the line. But mostly I think it's... you've got to accept that's the way I get through things. And it's a great coping mechanism and medicine to be able to laugh, and I think there was so much that was funny in this, and so many of the, the book was so easy to write, because I'd written blogs that weren't really about the cancer, but that helped me remember what had happened, but just every time I went into the hospital, something weird or when you're getting your balls scanned, it's it was such blubbers. Again, it was during COVID, but I was asked 3 times before I got into the scanning room for my name and address. That there was hundreds of men trying to sneak into this to get their balls scanned. Which once I was in there, I thought maybe because you get stuff smeared on there, and then someone uses a scanner, and there's someone sitting in the corner watching, which was what I liked about it. They're silently watching. I didn't like the smearing, but the silent watching. Who is that person? We've got to fund the NHS somehow. But you're asked. You put on a gown, and it's all very proper. And they're going, and then can you lie down? If you could use this paper towel to kind of shield your penis and hold your penis out of the way, so that won't be seen. That will maintain your dignity. And then you're just lying there with your arse and balls hanging out and being smeared. So it was funny. Yeah. All those things are funny. When I went for chemotherapy, they measured my height wrong, and I was in it, but in centimetres, so I wasn't sure. But I thought I'm not. They'd gotten 9 centimetres over, and I was thinking, they kind of made a mistake. Just reading off a ruler. But then I thought, what if it makes a difference to the chemotherapy? Yeah. So I was Googling my height in Imperial to check whether they got it right, and they hadn't got it right. And I went back and said, you got it wrong. I said, no, maybe your trainers have, they're not 3 inches high. I'm not.
Spice Girls.
And so, I did. I almost didn't tell them because my BMI went right down. I suddenly found out what it was like to be 5'10", and it was amazing. But just that sort of weird things like that happening. So, and as a comedian, I live in my daily life is very similar now. I live in the countryside with my family and my kids, and so you're not getting the same level of ideas coming into you. So suddenly being thrust into all these alien environments and seeing, going into the full body scanner I noticed it was made by Siemens, who also make my washing machine, and I thought, have they bought this for the same reason I did, which is because it's got a funny name.
Yeah.
And I also didn't like the fact that Siemens were multitasking. I want a body scanner made by someone who specialises in body scanner. What if I get put on microwave settings by mistake? So, and there was a little dent, as I was going in, there was a little dent in the machine, and you're kind of thinking, what the fuck happened with the last person? And it's not mentioned, so like there's, every single thing I guess your perceptions were sharpened and I was noticing stuff. But I also, all the way through, was surrounded by people who were way iller than me. I mean, I never felt ill. Yeah. Basically, I just noticed my ball seemed to be getting bigger. I wasn't even really sure, and it felt a bit heavy. It didn't hurt. There was no blood. There was no outward sign. The GP initially told me it was probably nothing to worry about. They would send me into a scan anyway, but it was almost certainly epididymitis.
He said he would bet that it was.
Yeah, he said if I was a betting man, I would say it's epididymitis, which is kind of concerning that what kind of bookie would take that bet, and is it fair for a doctor to lay bets on that? I don't know, and what the odds would be. But yeah, so it was, and then I didn't, apart from having to recover from the operation and having to recover from a very mild chemo, it felt like I was just sort of being given a tourist version of cancer.
Yeah.
Almost felt like you're a writer, we'll show you what it's like, but the play version of it, and you can write about it because all the when I went in for that scan. The people in the room, I was writing I was researching Twitch of Fun and writing my blog, thinking about puppet shows, and there was people lying on beds, hours away from dying, and it was, and people properly ill in the chemotherapy ward as well. Again, I went in for 45 minutes or something, and everyone else obviously went in there multiple times and were really ill, and so it gave you a proper perspective on how lucky I was.
Yes.
And how much and how brilliant the NHS were again through this incredibly difficult time, and they were almost to a person just so good-natured and joking and fun.
Yeah.
And when they were going through the worst possible time, someone did tell me they thought they were probably just going back to their proper jobs, and were all a bit delighted that they weren't dealing with as much COVID, which might have been part of it, but it was such, given it was still that second wave of COVID, it was early 2021, and like in 2020, I thought, God, this would be a really bad time to get cancer, and but there was never, I never even considered it would be me. I just thought, God, this, you wouldn't want to get cancer now. But they, like I say, it was within a month. I don't think if I'd gone private, I don't think it would have been any quicker than,
no.
And it certainly wouldn't have been as, they were so brilliant. So,
Yeah, it's kind of like throughout the book, you constantly sing in the NHS's praises, and more so the people in the NHS.
Yeah, I mean, what they have to deal with is insane. And my same hospital I've been into a couple of times for A&E for my kids, and been told to go by doctors, strep and stuff like that. And it's been absolute bedlam and hell, and for the staff and the patients, absolutely fucking ridiculous. And why anyone isn't going, why aren't you everyone has to go, if you're at A&E, it doesn't matter if you're private, you've got to go to A&E if you have an accident or an emergency. So every single person in this country is just betting their lives on the fact that they won't have an accident or an emergency. Because you go to A&E, and there's a much bigger chance you're going to die now than there was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So people should be up in arms about this and furious about it. And the people working in the NHS are absolutely incredible. So anyone not supporting the industrial action is insane. Yeah. Anyone saying, well, you found the money for your mates to get some PPE to throw away, so you can find the fucking money to get the A&Es working. It should be the first thing. So I'm a big supporter of that. And it was nice to get my oncologist didn't really know who I was. I don't think, pretended he did, but I think he'd Googled me and found out that I think that the International Women's Day and Scope have raised sort of hundreds of thousands of pounds by incidentally, and I think he thought, oh good, we'll try. He said very early, will you raise some money for my charity? So I did raise some money for the hospital and for his charity as well. So it was nice to give a little bit back, but again, that shouldn't be necessary, but it's it's equally. It was nice to do that. I think if we can give stuff back as much as we can.
Absolutely. One of the other heroes of the book is your wife Katie.
Yeah.
And you're constantly saying how great she is, and do you find that that you needed to shine a light on that because the sort of partners of people going through stuff sometimes get forgotten about?
Yeah, I just think it was way worse for Katie, the whole thing, because there's some graphic reasons why it was worse for her. You have to wear a jockstrap for sort of the week after the operation, they sort of made it sound like you have to wear it all the time. And I did change it. I changed it every day, but I was wearing a jockstrap all the time in bed and everything. And so I got really bad sores right at the top of my leg in a place that I couldn't really apply the unguent to. So I basically she had to come in and I had to put my legs over my head as she applied unguent.
That's love.
No one should see that in the cold light of day. And it smelled, it was horrible. So things like that were pretty bad. But, equally and she's a very pessimistic person, and I'm quite optimistic in our relationship, and she'll always, I'm pretty good at seeing the things that could go wrong, but I always kind of gun for the optimism, and she's always quite negative. And so she had to be against type, because she couldn't be like, oh no, you're going to die, and leave me on. And so, she had to cope with the idea that her husband might die and leave her with two really young kids. And also pick up. She had wisdom teeth out the week after I had my ball out. Any other time she'd been able to relax, but a ball's that trumps a wisdom tooth. So she was looking after me and the kids on her own while I was recovering from my operation, while she was still recovering from a lesser but still painful operation. And and none of this was that bad for me. So she was. I really think. It's very easy to overlook that in a story like this, and she was incredible, but she is incredible. So it was nice to be able to pay tribute to her. I think her book would be more interesting from the other side, applying unguent to my one testicle husband.
Oh, bless her. And then sticking with the family thing is I love in the book you sort of talk about trying to force happy memories on your children, because you go through an existential crisis about them not remembering you. Yeah,
well, they were just that. My son would not. If I died that year, he was 3. It really. I sort of did cry when I got this phone call, and it was initially thinking, oh my God, my kids, but it sort of quickly went to, my wife will find someone else, and my kids won't remember. So it quickly became quite selfish. My wife will run off, and the ex-husband will drink all the whiskey I've been saving. What an idiot. There was no special occasion came. And so it felt like, especially with a 3-year-old, you've put in a lot of hard work to get a child to 3, and then for them to not even remember you. So I was trying to, I was sort of aware of, for my daughter as much as my son, to more for my daughter really, to create some events. Like it snowed, and I thought, oh great, I remember all the snow days when I was a kid. This is a day we can really impact on this. But I remember that being videoed. She threw a big snowball at me, and I remember it being videoed. And I knew as it was being videoed, I was thinking, oh, this is the video they'll be watching when I'm dead. And so you can sort of see me attempting to be funny and the smile as I'm feeling sad about this. And I thought we went for a walk. And the snow was starting to melt really quickly, and I'd said we could make a snowman when we got back to their house. And I was thinking, oh no, we're not going to be able to do it, so she won't remember this. And so we quickly kind of started making this snowman in the garden, but then I realised that because it was winter, the dog had been out there pooing in the garden, and we were pushing it, and we hadn't cleared it up because we were pushing, and there was just this sort of dog shit covered snowman, and finally went over a bit of dog diarrhea that their dog had that morning. And so then I think, this is going to be I thought I got this great memory. The memory is going to be, that's the guy who made that dog shit snowman with me. And then the one I made fell apart, so it was, it reminds me of Groundhog Day, but partly because there's a scene with making snowmen and stuff in that. But when he's trying to recreate the perfect day with Andy McDowell in the snow, it works the first time, and then he's trying to make it happen. When he's trying to make it happen, it doesn't work. Everything goes slightly wrong. He's trying a bit too hard, and it's really like that. And so within the book, there's the day after I got the diagnosis that I was going to have the testicle taken out, it happened. We took a kite that she'd got for Christmas and went, and it was really stormy but blustery. and we just had this sort of not almost accidentally had this amazing father-daughter experience of flying this kite and her managing to do it despite us not really knowing what we were doing. And that was the the moment you go, oh, hopefully she would remember that. Hopefully she won't have to only remember that, but that's so it was interesting how that just happened organically rather than when you were trying to force memories on your kids.
Because luckily you did survive. Like, you can force
so far.
Yeah, so far.
I still might die.
You
apparently.
can still force the dog shit snowball on them as one of those. Every family has those stories they bring up every Christmas or whatever.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it may be. Well, there's a story towards the end about my son pooing on the patio at my mum and dad the first time we came to go fish and running around the garden with the poo hanging out his bum. We're definitely going to talk about that for the rest of his life.
That's 18th birthday material, isn't it? You end the book by saying that you want it to be positive, like you don't want it to be negative.
Yeah.
Like you say, you're constantly joking about it throughout, even when you're saying the bits where you were scared.
Yeah.
So like earlier you said, well, 99% of people who get it live.
Yeah.
And then you talk about it in the book, but what if I'm the 1%?
Yeah, because I've still got a disease that only 1 in 270 people get.
Yeah, you'd beat the odds.
So 1 in 270 men. So if that can happen to me, then 1 in 100's much more likely.
But do you feel like since you have got a more positive attitude?
Yeah, I think.
Has it changed you in any way?
It made me think really. It made me understand what my priorities were, which I'm not saying I didn't understand before, but it really nailed home, as COVID did as well, how important my family was and how, I decided in lockdown, regardless, I think really, but a lot was to do with this as well, was just that I'm only going to do things now that I really want to do, if it's a choice between staying at home and going out. So being very selective and making sure my priority, in my whole life, I prioritized my career above everything else, which is why I didn't have kids until I was in my late 40s. And so, I think it's real. It made you realize what was important. It made me realize how much I didn't want to die. So especially in that year, I got very fit, and I'm trying to keep that up. I'm not doing quite as well as I was doing, but I got, I sort of, within that year, I wanted to be, I wanted to run a half marathon in the same year as I'd had the operation.
Yeah.
And so I got really, properly kind of concentrate on getting fit in order not to die, just in order to, because that might not kill me, but being a fat old man might kill me. So, so I wanted to change my life to that extent. Things slip back and forwards, and you can't ever quite stick with all of those things. But it made me really realize priorities and made me, I sort of, even though I wasn't going to die, it felt like I was going to die, and it still feels a bit like, oh, this is extra. Yeah. This is sort of extra time, so I should really enjoy it and make the most of it, and try and and try and just carry on making those memories for your kids. I mean, it's weird, all the things, because there was also feeling the kids are 3 and 5. If I just died straight away, maybe that would be best because they wouldn't remember me, and then it wouldn't be as painful. So you go through all these weird bargains with yourself and all that kind of thing. But you just got to. It's good to be reminded that this isn't permanent. It's really hard to genuinely believe you are going to die.
Yes.
And it's very, or to believe that you might just die today. And so it's worth remembering and make sure, I've always felt I've always been very positive and I enjoy life, and I've always thought the chances of being alive are so tiny that whatever life we get here is, we're so fortunate to be here, and we're only going to be here for a tiny amount of time, and once we're not here anymore, none of it really matters anyway. Yeah. So, it's about enjoying life while you're here. So being reminded of that is not a bad thing. I think, the whole, aside from the one obvious negative of losing a part of my body, which is not nice, everything else felt so positive, and it was a funny experience. It was a joyful experience. It brought us close together. It made, I think it's easy to be, it's easy to have a negative mindset and go, oh, woe is me. Yeah. But I think as long as you're looking around and going, fuck, we're sitting in, like, we're in Wolverhampton, we're in a room with loads of pictures on the wall. Imagine that. Imagine how the rest of the people in Wolverhampton feel about this hoi polloi up here. So there's always something. There's always, our lives are pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And we're very lucky to be born now. We're very lucky to be in this country, even despite its many problems. So it's about looking at the positives, and I suppose and that it just made me reaffirm that, but in a very.
And then, do you have plans for any future books? Obviously, this book wasn't planned.
No.
I like the way you say in it. You're like, oh, maybe there's a book deal in this. Keep reading to find out if I get one.
Yeah. I really wish it had put at the end. P.S. I did get the book deal. I realised that should have been the last line of the book. So just write that in. By the way, I did get the book deal. I don't know. I've had a few things in with the publishers, but I haven't heard anything back. So I'd quite like to write like something more like a novel next, maybe. But it is much harder to do that. So I've got quite a few high concept things that I'm not sure I'd work out. There's always I started a Twitter feed about impossible questions from kids because and it's mentioned in the. It'd be nice to do that because it's right at the end of this book. My son came in one morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, woke me up and said, "Dad, do ghosts have bum holes?" And like it had obviously been playing. He couldn't wait. He had to wake me up to do that, and then try and answer that question. And it's quite hard to. It's kind of more complicated than you think. So I thought there might be a book in just trying to answer lots of kids' really impossible questions and give a definitive answer and talk to some experts. But I had that nothing, and weirdly, I set up the Twitter account. I have my own publisher. Sphere do publish my books at the moment, anyway. But I set up the Twitter account, and within 25 minutes, someone had emailed me or messaged me and say, "Do you want a book deal? We can get you a book deal for this." So it was one of those ideas. This is really good, and then look, this is obviously something's going to happen with this, but then nothing's happened so far with that. But so I might do something like that. But there's a few. I'd quite like to write some sort of sci-fi novels and things.
Time travel.
Sort of time travel. I've got an idea about. I was at a wedding. And they were playing loads of 80s music, and I was but I was almost the only person there who was old enough to remember it the first time round. And I was just sort of thinking, it reminded me of all the school disco, so they're playing Madness and stuff like that. And I just thought it nearly took me back to that time. So I'd quite like to do one of those where you travel back in time to, you're kind of, 55-year-old man, you're looking around a wedding thinking, oh, when I used to go to weddings, I used to be able to fancy all the bridesmaids and, try and get off with the adult bridesmaids. Suddenly Wolverhampton. And now I'm 55 and they're not looking at me anymore, because I'm an old man. And so that idea of going back, that sort of vice versa thing, but then never being able to escape it and never coming back. And thinking, and also the way that it would, if you went back to being 14 and you were 55, and you wouldn't be able to recreate. I don't remember anything about it, what actually happened. So if you went back, the minute you went back, everything in the world would change, and so you'd be trapped in this parallel universe and think, well, do I have to do the right thing to get back? But then he never gets. I've ruined the story for the people. He never gets back and just dies in a different timeline, never seeing his family and kids again.
Well,
because that's what would happen. There's not a happy ending, and he never works out what was going. He just dies, and never works out what was going on or why it happened.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the ghost bomb holes one, if I'm honest.
We'll see. But I keep on having ideas like that. But I kind of like the kind of bleak, to do sort of bleak sci-fi rather than. And that's that's the truth of it. If you go and change. I know I've gone about this a lot, but if you change one thing in anything in the past, everything completely changes. So it would be interesting in a way to do that, to see, I thought, something like, I can't remember the times of it, but say the space shuttle disaster doesn't happen, not because you've told anyone, just because enough has changed in the world. But equally, you would go back and go, oh, so now I can bet on the FA Cup, and you go, no idea what the score. No, I don't. Without the internet or any books. You wouldn't actually remember fuck all about what happened in 1983, would you?
Because you said that on Twitter the other day, and that kind of blew my mind a little bit. You're like, Biff's almanac would be put
the minute he wins,
almost like.
The minute he wins once, then enough has changed. And so if he wins 5 times, people are going to go, no, you can't bet here anymore. Fuck off. But also the next race, once one race has been done and something's changed, then every little action changes everything else in the world. So this guy being on the front of the newspaper with "I've won £1 million" would change everything else, and none of the other sports results would be the same. Wolves are winning. They wouldn't be if Biff had won that.
If you were back at a school disco as a 55-year-old.
So yeah, no one's bought that book yet. So.
Only a matter of time. And then, because this is a literature festival and you're doing a book club podcast at the minute, have you got any books that you'd like to recommend?
I mean, there's loads. I haven't had him on yet, but Ben McIntyre's book about Colditz I loved over Christmas. Tom Crew, who is actually my brother-in-law's boyfriend, but is this highly fated new novelist. He's written a book called The Good Life. No, it's called The New Life. The New Life. Good Life's a different thing. The New Life, which is about gay people in the late 19th century, which is fantastic. Sort of Oscar Wilde features, but not very much. And what else has been good? Ashes to Admin by Evie. I know her real name, Evie King, I want to say, but that's not her actual name because she works in local government dealing with assisted funerals for people who die and don't have enough money to make funerals, and so this is really, I think it's really fantastic. She used to be a stand-up, and it is Evie King, but it's really because it's a person doing a job you don't know about and putting a lot more effort, as we were sort of talking about, into it than is necessary or that anyone else would do. So she really, because she cares and she really gets invested in the stories and wants to find out about the people's lives and make sure they have a good ceremony to send off. And it's really fascinating, but makes you think about life and more about life, but it's obviously a bit about death. But yeah, there's the minute I started doing RHLSP, I realised how many absolutely phenomenal comedians there are, because you start watching, you interview them and you look at all their work and you go, oh fuck man, you could go, why are they doing so well? And you go, oh, it's because they're really good. And the minute you start doing like a book a week, you go, there's so many books. I mean, there's so many books out all the time, and then I get thrown into some areas where I wouldn't usually go. I don't usually read novels, and I like kind of stuff like evolution and history and comedy. But by going and looking at what other people are doing, it's, and I think if you want to be a writer yourself, it's really important to read as much as you can. I really haven't done it as much as I should have done. And it's very inspiring to see people. And, I think like writing a novel, I think is just so hard compared to just saying what happened in your own life in an amusing way. So, I have a lot of respect for authors, and it's kind of, it's interesting doing literature festivals and meeting like proper clever authors and stuff. So it's, but there's so, if you listen to my RHLSP book clubs, you'll have thousands, well, hundreds, or 50 recommendations, but eventually, hopefully, I'll keep on doing it because it's a real privilege, and weirdly, most authors are pretty keen to do it. So because I just do it online, so it's really easy to do. But I think most authors were flattered that you were interested in their work, because again, it's a hard job to publicise. I think it's great. There's things like this. It's really great. There are literature festivals around the country, and well done to Phil for sorting out this one. But it's it's so difficult to get people to know about your books. So many books go. I feel like my books, that I'm lucky to get published, but they sort of go out into the world, and I don't know how many people really see them, and so it's great that everything you can do to sort of help anyone read these stories and find out what people are up to.
It's interesting to hear with that podcast, to hear you talk about sort of one subject with a guest as well, because it's obviously when they come on RHLSP, you talk about their whole careers or whatever, so it's good to sort of focus in sometimes.
Yeah, in a way it should be easier, but then I do have to read a book a week, and that's sometimes more than a book a week, and so it's quite hard compared to, because often I'll just research RHLSP in the day. I'll sometimes watch their shows and stuff in the week, but that's not much of a imposition. But so it is. But it's really nice to get back to reading so much. I use a lot of audiobooks, which is a great way of getting through a lot more content, because you can. I have to walk a dog 2 times a day and drive places, and so you can get through books quite quickly that way.
It's before we move it over to questions from the crowd, I was just going to bring up your audiobook as well, because it's clear you've put a lot of effort into your audiobook. It's not just you reading the story, there's bonus material. And is that the podcaster in you that's wanted to make it more interesting?
I think audiobooks are so great, and I think it's a real privilege as a listener, especially when it's the author reading it themselves, and I think with comedians you should always do it, because you'll really get the comedy definitely, they can definitely perform it, and they'll know where the jokes are. But most people who read audiobooks are pretty fantastic at it, generally speaking, I have to say. So I think you get a lot more from it. I think the problem is sometimes your mind drifts, and then you're a bit more lost, and it's a bit easier to find your place in a book if that happens. But yeah, I want to give value, and I think if it's easy to put in another hour of content, then it gives people a chance to experience extra stuff. So yeah, I talked to Katie. I interviewed Katie. I interviewed my oncologist, which will also be in the podcast series at some point, and talked to my bollock puppet. And I'm glad I did that as the last thing that I did on the day, because I was in there for two or 3 days with a very nice man who enjoyed my book, and then the last thing I did was said, I'm just going to talk to this. And so I improvised a conversation with my bollock. And he'd been laughing for the rest of the time, and he's looked a bit confused.
Did you have the puppet?
Yeah, of course it did. I can't just talk to my hand. It's not going to work.
Foolish of me.
No, if you need the puppet, it's weird. But honestly, sometimes when it's going very well, that ventriloquism, like Ali, who's the main puppet, I'll forget something and ask him what it is, and he'll know. And it's not me pretending. He'll, because that's how your brain works. If you don't think about something, you'll remember it.
Yeah.
But it's like really weird. Sometimes there'll be a disconnect between the two of us, and he'll say something I'm not expecting, really. So,
or sing a song that
he sings a song. Yeah. But it's but that's the great thing about improv, because you don't have time to really think about it. So it feels like it's being beamed. And sometimes when comedy's going really well, when you're doing stand up, and it's going really well, you're improvising in the set. You're doing a set you've done loads of times, and you find a new door and open it, and there's a whole new bit of and then you do it better than you could ever do if you sat down and wrote it. And you go, how did that happen? How did that happen? Why hasn't that happened the previous 100 times? Where did that come from? And how did I do it perfectly when I could sit down for the whole day and try and work an idea and not get it?
Stare at a blank piece of paper or a blank
screen. So it's, I think that's when you can sort of switch off it's either being beamed into your head by aliens, or you switch off your conscious brain and your subconscious brain sort of takes over. So there is an element of where...
The puppets are sentient.
Oh, the puppets are real. and they wake up at night and come down and kill me.
Right. Phil's got a microphone. Has anyone got any questions for Richard?
Hi guys, Future Mark here, just to say I've cut out the Q&A section because I didn't get the people's permission to use their voices, and it would probably be fine, but it was a headache that I just didn't want, so I've cut those out. But what I have left in is Richard's answer to the final question, because I think it's really important, so I'm going to finish with that.
Always remember to keep checking yourselves. It's looking out for just anything different, right? It's not always going to be lumps. It's not always going to be obvious. Just get to know yourself, and this applies to breasts and male chests and testicles and everything, really. Just get to know your body, and if there's anything that is different, just go and get it checked out. And the GP won't be upset with you even if you go several times. It's very easy to become paranoid, and I've been in a few times, mainly justifiably with other problems, and they're always very happy to see you. So because mostly it won't be anything. So you can suffer, and you can sit there going, "Oh God, is this a thing?" And I waited quite a few weeks before I went in, and you're sitting there going, "Oh, I'm going to die," but I won't. So you might as well go and if you're going to die, find out you're going to die, because we want to make the most of your life. But equally, if you've got something like this, the earlier you can go in, the better. So the minute you think there's anything wrong, go in, check yourself, check each other. Charlie Borman's advice is for men to check their partner's breasts and women to check their partner's testicles, or in whatever combination you have. And then if it goes well, you can have some fun times.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Herring.
You have to embarrass yourself, Mark.